Okay, so I want to thank everyone for being here. We're so excited to see this turn out. And um, we are going to be using the chat feature to capture questions or thoughts on things. So feel free to use that. If you have questions, we may not answer it immediately at that point, but we'll be gathering them to answer them at times where we have a pause for discussion. So first, I want to introduce Emily Yankee. She is the director of the Institute for Community and Economic Engagement at UNCG and also faculty in the Peace and Conflict Studies department. She's going to talk just a little bit about LEAP so everyone knows who's sponsoring this.
Sure. So thank you. So LEAP is about 3 years old, and it is a collaborative partnership between and among Guilford County residents and representatives of health service agencies, healthcare providers, institutions of higher educations, foundations, city and county governments. And so the work that we are doing, and so some of this is on this website. So I wanted you to see that this is the website that for LEAP. And so this is where you can come back to time and time again. And so part of our work is really to help people connect to issues that matter, to people that we care about, and to ask better questions through seeking better data, better engagement. And so there are just a couple of things that I wanted to point to is that our website is continually updating. And so there are going to be some new things that you'll see in the next few weeks and months. One of them is our LEAP report, which talks about the state of data around healthy eating and physical activity in Guilford County and Greensboro. And so this was a study that we did to be able to understand sort of what data do we have and what data do we need. And this is really with an equity lens, thinking about social determinants of health, and really thinking about not just tracking morbidities and like disease. So when people walk in the door after they've had issues, but what are the kinds of indicators that we would like to see that can help us move towards healthy behaviors, healthy actions, healthy policies. The other one is the community board, which will be one of the in-process webinars that we'll do in, I think, March. And so that, what's that? April. And so this is funded by Cone Health, UNCG, with support from A&T, and the rest of our LEAP board members and institutions. And so this is a group that is really focused at engaging residents and neighborhood level folks in discussions about research and data use. And so this is a really exciting development, in many ways, the first of its kind with professional development for those serving on the community board, stipends, as well as opportunities to really inform our research. So we will share more about that in the future and on this website. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you. Okay, so what I am going to do now is introduce our presenters. And so tonight we have Dr. Karen Jackson with us. She is faculty in the Leadership Studies and Adult Education Department at North Carolina A&T State University, where she teaches research design, quantitative and qualitative research methods, ethics, and policy courses, and also works with students to design their own dissertation studies. Her work is grounded in systems and organization theory, policy studies, understanding of community engagement, equity, and social justice. She believes that understanding systems and policies that influence individuals' ability to navigate communities and organizations is important. Helping leaders understand how these systems and policies can create pathways and barriers, especially for underrepresented groups and people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, is a goal for her work. Dr. Jackson's research and evaluation team at Catalyst Innovative Consulting Services performed the external evaluation for the Healthy and Equitable Food Systems Capital Initiative. And Hannah Quigley is a giver, an organizer, a public health practitioner, and a passionate member of her community. Since 2014, she has worked alongside community members and farmers to understand barriers to healthy food access and markets, seeking to find dynamic models that promote food justice and economic well-being. She is committed to community-centered, asset-based program design and has been an experienced project manager for a variety of regional and national projects. She currently works with Richmond City Health Department to ensure that the food access policy in the city is led by community, centering their experiences in the design to ensure solutions that are empowering and tailored to the unique needs of Richmonders. Prior to that, she coordinated the Healthy and Equitable Food System Capital Initiative at SelfHelp Credit Union, which she will share more about in tonight's presentation. All right, so now I'm going to share the slides for everyone, and Karen and Hannah will take it away.
Thanks so much, Kathleen, and everyone else for being here. Good evening again, everyone. We're very excited to have you. And hopefully we won't have any technical issues, but I
we
imagine...
do need to start at the beginning of the...
No problem. I believe, I don't know about you all, but patience is something I have developed a greater, expertise at maybe during the pandemic.
All right.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you all again. Wonderful. Well, I am going to kick off just first with giving a little bit of an overview of SelfHelp Credit Union, where is the bulk of this work was completed. They are a community development financial institution, or for those of you that may be unfamiliar with that term, a mission-driven bank. SelfHelp has accomplished an immense amount of work promoting economic well-being for communities. So I'm actually going to provide a very high-level overview, but you can always find out more on the website. They were founded in 1989, originally focusing on providing small loans actually to worker-owned cooperatives. Over time, growing those services for small businesses, home ownership, with a heavy focus for women-owned businesses and households, as well as minority-owned businesses and households. But a big part of their work is through the years of lending and financial services is understanding the systemic issues at play that were preventing capital access, which really brought them to pursue state and federal policy change to promote and protect access to fair lending services. So this model is what really led them to pursue the Healthy and Equitable Food Systems Capital Initiative, generous funding from W.K. Kellogg Foundation, which has really provided the effort to do these activities over the last 4 years. And I believe Emily Sloss is here with us. And so from SelfHelp, and then I'm not sure if anyone else has joined yet from SelfHelp, but just wanted to give a shout out to Emily for being here. All right. Thanks, Kathleen. So just a quick overview. The Healthy and Equitable Food Systems Capital Initiative, mouthful, aims to increase capital access for food enterprises ranging anywhere from our farmers, food processors, distributors, hubs, and grocery stores serving low-income communities. The mechanisms for these to achieve these aims included building lending and economic and development synergies by creating a national network of lenders and organizations that will improve capital access for underserved food entrepreneurs. Another one was to leverage healthy food system lending experience and organizational connections to create partnerships that can increase capital delivery to innovative borrowers most in need. And Kathleen, actually, if you want to go back to the previous slide for me.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I think we're on slide 2. Yeah. So right here on our slide, we have our outcomes. And I'm going to just go over really quickly some of the activities that we believed would help us achieve these outcomes, and then I'll go through the outcomes as well. Some of those activities for these aims were identifying and engaging entrepreneurs of color, designing and developing methods of tracking data and connecting relevant stakeholders using innovative platforms, collaborating to build and establish important relationships, and communicating important information in a variety of forms and platforms to meet individuals. These activities were intended for the outcomes listed here, but a strong national network of lenders and organizations committed to improving the capital flow to food system and entrepreneurs across the food spectrum. Collaboration between conventional lenders, CDFIs, the farm credit system, and other sustainable agriculture and healthy food organizations, with hopes of building a borrower pipeline to increase referrals between these relatively disconnected funders. To a comprehensive resource of loan products for CDFIs and agricultural lenders, community banks, and other local funders. Legal and data analysis to understand capital gaps and identify predatory lending practices to inform development of policies to combat these practices. Successful collaboration and discussion regarding federal policy among a small targeted group of CDFIs that actively work in the healthy food system finance space. And then improved data tracking, measurement, and a deeper understanding of food system impact on local economies and the broader community outcomes.
All right, Hannah, thanks for sharing that. So I will just kind of mention the team members for the external evaluation included myself and Dr. Ernest Cuthbertson, who worked as a research associate, and Olivia Pietrafeza, who also did a wonderful job and helped us with our reporting. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the processes we went through and some of the activities that we as the external evaluators participated in. So I attended the Black Urban Growers Conference in Durham, North Carolina back in 2018. That was one of the first things I had the opportunity to do as a part of the external evaluation. It was the first conference I can remember attending where I immediately felt deeply connected to everyone there. And it was clear that the people attending loved the earth and they loved just doing what they do with the earth. And they knew that, it's like they knew that the earth heals. And Leah Penniman calls that the healing power of the soil. The Bugs Conference is where I first learned of Leah Penniman. She's the owner of Soulfire Farm in Grafton, New York, and author of Farming While Black. The Farming While Black book is also called, the extension of the title is Soulfire Farm's Practical Guide to Liberation on the Land. In 2013, Penniman negotiated a deal with the Albany County District Attorney's Office to allow area youth to abbreviate their juvenile detention sentences and earn food for their families by logging time at the farm. The farm expanded its mission to include the cultivation of entrepreneurs of color back in 2012. Penniman also hosts an intensive week-long course for Black Latin farmers. And she says that the end game is land and food sovereignty for disenfranchised populations. And I share this information because the model that Penniman uses for her farm provides an example of some of the activities that we believe create space for equitable outcomes to take place. So if we move forward here, Penniman's concern for her community to have healthy food is warranted. Many large corporations, we all know, aim junk food ads at low income communities. We know that could explain $7 billion per year SNAP funding spent on unhealthy processed foods. The lack of healthy food is contributing to what we know, and the Surgeon General he's equated it to a health crisis, and he even calls it a threat to national security. The health crisis is also directly related to the food we have access to or lack of access to, healthy food. So the food system can mean the difference between people living and dying. It means different things to different people. For some, it means the difference between quality, taste of food. For others, it means revenue, expenditures, for their restaurants, their farms, grocery, corporation. It's different things for different people. Some people consider the land, some people consider environment, climate justice. When they're thinking about the influence of the growing food has on the carbon cycles. In the current food system, the government, corporations, and lobbyists have one level of influence, which is represented in this diagram, while the growers, distributors, shippers, buyers, sellers all have another level. We all need one another. So all the players here need one another and exercise some influence on others. And the interests and values play a part in how they decide what to invest. Many farmers and farm workers we know, though, live below the poverty line and have no health care. And we also know that the average restaurant worker makes about $10 an hour. So, as we were doing this work, one of the questions we begin to ask ourselves is, how are we defining equity in the food system? And is there a need to redefine equity in the food system? So I want to throw out a question to the group, to the audience. How do you see yourself participating in making the food system more equitable? And you can pop answers in the chat. Or how do you just participate in the food system, even if you don't feel like it's you're promoting equity? So if you think of something, pop it in the chat. I see some things, some folks. Okay, I see some growers, a grower. Well, a Pew Research Center data show a picture of the racial wealth divide in the United States that create extreme barriers to Black and brown healthy food entrepreneurs' access to capital for business development. Whites in the United States have access to $142,000, while African Americans have access to merely $11,000 from the Common Food Funding Path of Family and Friends. According to the Census Bureau, $30,000 is the capital starting point to get a startup off the ground, which leaves African American startups at a significant disadvantage. Wealth building through entrepreneurship is one recommended strategy to address racial inequities, and is a goal of the initiative that that we're talking about tonight. Other recommended strategies to increase equity in the food system include land ownership, promoted for people of color that own land are not exploited, barriers to capital needed to open, build capacity, and or sustain healthy food businesses for people of color are removed, policies that create health disparities for people in poor communities and disproportionately for people of color are abolished, and the creation of opportunities to raise awareness of financial support programs. Research shows that systems and policies created to provide opportunity and build wealth for white entrepreneurs also create barriers for Black and Hispanic entrepreneurs. These challenges to gaining access to capital have historical roots in racism, and some tend to believe that the solutions are complex. However, research also has many examples of simple solutions that can be addressed from inside financial institutions and within the financial institutional network. So we plan to share some after we tell you about our approach to researching and evaluating this work. Our overall hypothesis for the work is that with a more integrated regional food network, the long-term opportunities for entrepreneurship and innovation will improve. And in turn, and Kathleen, we need to advance the slide, I think, that will contribute to social, ecological, and economic resilience. So that's what this model is demonstrating. It's our hypothesis for the regional food network. An integrated regional food network refers to connection and interaction of people, place, and prosperity with respect to social, economic, and the ecological. The RFN, which stands for Regional Food Network, marketing includes direct to consumer and local regional intermediate sales to retail restaurants, institutions, or distributors that maintain regional place of origin. For resilience, what we're talking about, we're referring to the capacity of a system to absorb disturbance and reorganize while undergoing change. And specifically, we're talking about community resilience, which supports a broader regional resilience. And it relies on a sense of place, access to jobs, affordable food and housing, general health, an ability to rebound after variable economic, social, ecological shocks. So something like a COVID-19, right? Black farmers are a group of entrepreneurs we were interested in working with for this initiative because we see the historical systemic issues. And sorry, my computer's doing weird stuff over here. There were 949,889 Black farmers in 1920. And today, of the country's 3.4 million total farmers, only 1.3%, or about a little over 45,000, are Black. And that's figures from the US Department of Ag from 2019. These farmers own about 0.52% of US farmland. By comparison, 95% of farmers in the United States are white. The Black farmers who have managed to hold on to their farms make less than $40,000 a year compared to over $190,000 by white farmers, which is probably because their average acreage is about 1/4 that of white farmers. So I have another question. What types of solutions or strategies do you know of that increase access to capital or promote financial viability for food entrepreneurs? So does anybody have any things that they've dealt with before, or ideas, or you've actually engaged in providing capital access or accessing capital for a business? All right, Molly. HFFI, yes. Great. Small business centers and community colleges, co-ops. Fantastic. So there are things out there, right? So what we're going to share tonight, some of the findings from the evaluation. There were so many opportunities that we were able to explore. Even in that there are opportunities out there, we still know the barriers are still great. The creation of the more resilient food system that we're talking about here does, we know, also require entrepreneurship and innovation. The ability for everyone to participate in entrepreneurship and innovation is not equal. Black and brown healthy food entrepreneurs are a necessary part of a resilient food system. Thank you guys for sharing those solutions. Hannah?
Great, thanks, Karen. So I spit out a lot earlier when I introduced the initiative, and this is our theory of change model here that just outlined that again. So just to connect us back where the initiative itself, where we have here those intended outcomes and our aims, as well as our goals, but with a particular emphasis, we're about to dive into a little bit more of some of the work, but again, you know, with a real emphasis on these activities that we're identifying and engaging entrepreneurs of color as well as other aligned funders, designing and developing tools and to really connect our stakeholders, and trying to use innovative platforms and different forms of technology, and collaborating to build and establish important relationships where we know that we learned a lot from entrepreneurs that relationships were a large part and key to moving into capital access more often than kind of previous knowledge and things like that. And then communicating and continuing to stay in touch and communicate out that information as well. And so we believed by that engaging in these activities and with the right people and really bringing that equity approach to that work, that we would influence the capital access for the individuals in our intended audience.
So when we started to design the evaluation for this initiative. Hannah and her team at SelfHelp were in the early stages of program development. So we felt like the best evaluation approach would be to design a developmental evaluation. And we can go to the next slide. And so that developmental evaluation approach gives us the opportunity to use mixed methods for data collection. And it also allowed us to integrate the equitable evaluation principles, which basically include an evaluation where the work is in service of equity. It also, evaluative work that's focused on equitable evaluation principles also is designed and implement commensurate with values that are underlying equity work. So multiculturalism, and it's oriented toward participant ownership. And we also wanted to be sure that we were answering critical questions about the ways in which the historical and structural decisions have contributed to the condition that's being addressed. So those are some of the principles we wanted to be sure to incorporate into our evaluation. We also wanted to have data-informed metrics to measure the impact that this initiative had on the system. So we used quantitative and qualitative measures because it's recommended that when you're looking at transformation and racial justice issues, that you use both. We also believe that using this approach opens up the kind of thinking that nurtures critical consciousness, where critical consciousness is basically the attainment of deep, meaningful, realistic, and reality-based understanding of one's world. Hannah?
Thanks, Karen. And so I think, Kathleen, if you want to take us to our next slide. So a part of this work, as I mentioned earlier, is really taking what we were learning from lending experiences and identifying systemic and policy changes to address those systemic barriers, but also to promote better capital access. So I'm going to share briefly a case related to some analysis related to federal policy and federal finance opportunities. And Karen will share some additional examples about commercial lending in the later after this. But so one of our policy approaches was to specifically understand gaps in capital access as it relates to farmers, and in particular farm credit. And the reason why we did look at this is because farm credit is one of the single largest holders of farm debt, including both land and operational debt. They hold 40% of all farm debt, which totals about $159 billion in the US. Farm credit system is a government-sponsored enterprise, so it's structured as a borrower-owned cooperative, and it was created actually by Congress in 1916. And at the time it was created, it was in order to provide reliable capital for our farmers and our agricultural and rural communities who were often ignored by traditional lending at that time. As a government-sponsored enterprise, they do receive implicit government guarantee and significant tax and funding advantages. So for our analysis specifically, we partnered with Alcorn State University, an 1890 HBCU land-grant university, and their socially disadvantaged farmer and rancher policy center, which was created through a previous, I think it was 2014 Farm Bill. And so they specifically sought out to research the leadership structure of farm credit, and as well survey farmers in the South who have had experience using capital or trying to access capital from either farm credit or farm service agency. So they did provide, in that leadership structure analysis specifically, they found that there are 69 farm credit associations throughout the country. Of those, we had sufficient data from 56 of them, and it showed that leadership represented 87% male across all of these associations, and it was 99% white. We know that racial discrimination within the USDA towards farmers of color has widely been documented, but there's been less data available actually related to capital access and farming lending practices towards farmers of color from farm credit. And so they sought out to understand that a little bit more by doing a survey with farmers in Alabama, Mississippi, Virginia, and North Carolina. So I'll just give you a couple of really key high-level takeaways from that survey. The level of awareness of financial support programs was very low. Only 40% of farmers they surveyed were aware of Farm Service Agency programs, and 56% were aware of farm credit programs. The proportion of socially disadvantaged farmers applying for financial support through either of these entities was also extremely low, only 17% through Farm Service Agency and 32% with farm credit. The reasons for denial for any of these loan applications from those surveyed were varied across, but the top three were insufficient credit, insufficient collateral, and incomplete applications. And then some of the more qualitative responses and things that we found common were socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers held a belief that the employees of these financial agencies were not helpful to them in navigating the application process. And they felt discouraged actually about seeking financial support from federal agencies. So throughout the course of the work, we actually, and broader entities and organizations, we're really seeing that farm credit's not necessarily doing enough to reach this, in particular, our socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers as identified from USDA. And so we were thinking about trying to determine better ways to serve all farmers. So SelfHelp has looked into previous experience with other government-sponsored lending enterprises, which is the Federal Home Loan Bank. And one key example from the Federal Home Loan Bank that they have initiated in order to serve these low-income communities and bringing a more equitable approach to these lending practices is actually doing a 10% set aside of net profits that go towards affordable housing grant programs. And so if we were to apply this model with the farm credit system, that means the equivalent of another government-sponsored enterprise could set aside 10% of their net profit, which would account for $500 million that could be allocated towards a grant funding source to support local and regional food system enterprises. This proposed grant set aside has has a lot of potential for true impact and meaning. So you may be asking, well, why have we not already done this? In order to create a grant set aside such as this, it would require an act of Congress. It looks like there is potential that it could be included in the Farm Bill of 2023, which is the next one that would be written and approved. And there has been some interest from senators in discussion about this idea, and as some of it can kind of be alluded to and seen in the Justice for Black Farmers Act that was introduced in November, so just a few months ago. That was our policy case. Yeah.
So I'll jump back in here and talk a little bit about some work that we were able to do back in November of 2019, seems like so long ago. We held a what we call the Equitable Food and Farm Financing Working Meeting in Little Rock, Arkansas. And we were able to bring together a network of about 60 funders, philanthropies, practitioners, and convening partners. And the goal of the work of the two-day meeting short-term goals were to identify a group of national food system finance stakeholders who were operating within a racial equity frame. We also wanted to create an opportunity for groups to share successful and unsuccessful equitable underwriting techniques so that lenders and funders could share in the learning. And then we also want to document those techniques and create a paper to share with a wider group of lenders. The long-term goals of that meeting were to engage a diverse group of CDFIs and other community-oriented or mission-aligned lenders and investors in the ongoing conversation around bridging the capital gap for entrepreneurs of color. And we also wanted to increase knowledge sharing to identify larger sector solutions for ongoing issues with capital access. As you can see by some of the quotes here on the slide from the meeting participants, credit policy, risk and loan technical assistance were at the forefront of the participants' minds during the meeting, which is why this next example, and we're going to switch to the next slide, is important. So the Garmi method is an innovative approach to commercial lending and is unique in its lack of requirements compared to conventional loan underwriting, and includes an ample amount of training and weekly meetings for clients. Program performance metrics collected by client surveys include characteristics of peer group methods, program structure, individual behavior incentives, confidence, group responsibilities, leadership skills, and teamwork. The program, named the Solidarity Microfinance Operation, occurred over 5 years and had 284 cumulative loan clients who represented a culturally diverse population. The program's data showed a 99% loan repayment rate, as well as clients experiencing an increased average income and increased savings. So an initiative that was a part of the Center for Community Self-Help Network, called the Runway Project out in Oakland, California, is an example from a lending institution that achieved what it can achieve when a community financial institution leverages philanthropy to provide low interest rate loans and partners with a community-based technical assistance program, very similar to what is described in the Garmi method research. The Runway Project in Oakland, that project closed the seed funding gap that typically comes from family and friends by providing affordable financing to 13 early and expansion stage Black-owned businesses in Oakland. The founder of the Runway Project, Jessica Norwood, says that the runway metaphor came to her naturally, she and her team, during the first stages of the project. When they were having conversations, she said, we kept hearing the same thing over and over again, that the underlying problem we were trying to solve is not so much related to entrepreneurs themselves as it is to the infrastructure around them. Does that sound familiar? What they were trying to solve was not a pilot problem, it was a runway problem. So Annie, another one of the project leads, helped launch the project in Richmond in San Francisco. Again, helping entrepreneurs, and the technical assistance in these areas was provided by an organization called the Optima Hub. And in those areas, they were able to position 7 entrepreneurs of color to obtain the necessary capital for their businesses. The model should be further examined, we believe, moving forward, to understand the capacity to replicate the collaborative effort between a local technical assistance provider and financial institution to meet the capital needs of entrepreneurs of color in other geographical areas. To date, the loans are structured to make only very small payments. So sustainability of the payments is still to be determined. The other caveat for application is that the quality and cost of Optima's technical assistance is key and subsidized. Runway is actively engaged in providing capital access and business development technical assistance to African-American entrepreneurs who are in need of funds to raise their businesses to the next level. It's pretty exciting. So can we go to the next slide? I'm going to share one more example of some of the data we were able to collect. And this data was very unexpected. We did not know COVID was going to happen when we started doing this work, but COVID did create an opportunity to give us kind of a microscope on what's happening with small businesses. So we all know that the House number 748, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act, was enacted by Congress in March of 2020. And it provides an opportunity to take a glimpse into the challenges that exist as a result of systemic barriers that keep entrepreneurs of color from accessing capital. The Paycheck Protection Program, contained in Division A, Title I, Section 1102 of the CARES Act, was established with the goal of keeping American workers paid and employed. The Small Business Administration is the administrator of the section. And on July 24th, the Paycheck Protection Small Business Forgiveness Act HR 7777 bill modified loan forgiveness under the PPP program, established to support small businesses in response to COVID-19. Specifically, the bill provides for automatic forgiveness of a paycheck protection loan that is not more than $150,000 if the recipient submits a one-page form. Such form must allow a recipient to submit specified demographic and expenditure information, and certain individuals are not eligible for such forgiveness. While the Paycheck Protection Program is a loan designed to provide a direct incentive for small businesses to keep their workers on the payroll, the bill prohibits any enforcement or other action against the lender relating to loan origination, forgiveness, or guarantee based on the lender's reliance on certifications or documentation submitted by a loan applicant or recipient. So lending institutions and self-help is represented here in the data that you see on the slide, were able to deliver PPP loans totaling $183 million to 1,758 businesses and nonprofits. 59% of those borrowers were businesses owned or led by people of color, and combined, close to 20,000 jobs were maintained. 184 small food businesses accessed over 18 million in PPP loan funds. The top 5 types of small food business loans made by dollar amount were full service restaurants, limited service restaurants, supermarkets, and other grocery caterers and community food services. The 128 food businesses received a total of $13,470,000. While the majority number of PPP food business loans were made to small businesses, the largest dollar amount of loans, meaning 10 million, went to white-owned small food businesses. We know the capital gaps exist, and what is described as the racial wealth gap endemic in the United States also contributes to the fact that while a business may have been in existence for many decades, their cash reserves, amount of collateral, and creditworthiness still may not be up to a level financial institution debt will find debt ready or loan ready. The Center for Responsible Lending, or CRL, research shows the administration of the PPP program, the application process, and the fee structure made it extremely difficult for small businesses, and particularly businesses owned by people of color, to qualify for assistance or receive it in time to save their businesses and the jobs of the employees that depend on them. Next slide, please. So we're getting close to time here, and I have just a little bit more to share around being an because I'm an evaluator and a researcher. One of the things that I'm seriously interested in, as well as concerned about, are the ways that we measure success, not only in just this initiative, but just in the ways that we measure equity in the food system. When I see quotes like the one represented here, it makes me want to ask more questions and get more information, because I know there are many approaches to choosing the appropriate metric, and not all approaches are equal or equitable. The Center for Regional Food Systems at Michigan State University has established recommended equitable food system metrics in the areas of food access, food and farm business, food chain labor, and food movement. The metrics in the example I will show you next are on the list. As noted by the entrepreneurs interviewed for this work, stories are also powerful forms of information, and their use as measures of influence and effectiveness is supported by multiple equity-based organizations, even by our Center for Environmental Farming Systems at North Carolina A&T State University's Committee on Racial Equity in Food System, or CORE. The Sustainable Food System Trust is using its global voice to promote an approach called the Economics and Ecosystems of Biosystems Evaluation Framework, which also includes metrics for equity and sustainability, which are fundamental and necessary when measuring food systems. Also know that some of you are probably familiar with ephod, the Equitable Food Oriented Development. It is a development strategy that uses food and agriculture to create economic opportunities, healthy neighborhoods, and explicitly seeks to build community assets, pride and power by and with historically marginalized communities. I find it very interesting that from a measurement perspective, that the characteristics of equitable evaluation are aligned with ephod. So if we could go to the next slide. Lastly here, well, let's think about it. We'll ask you guys a question. How do you think we should measure food system equity? I mean, what would it look like? Does anybody have any thoughts about that? What does successful food system equity look like? Pop your ideas in the chat. Oh, I love that. Access for all. Sustainability for all. No food deserts. Where's the ownership? Fantastic question. And were you wanting me to address that question, Marcus? Or was that in response to the question?
No, just in response to your question.
All righty, thank you.
But you can answer it if you want to.
Well, I mean, the capital access is we're trying to, that's our attempt at establishing opportunities for ownership for entrepreneurs. That's the whole goal here, is to try to provide more access to capital. If we can find other ways to change policy, I mean, the policy approaches here, and working on policy change and advocating for policy change is a big deal. But also working at the more local levels within financial institutions to change cultures there around commercial lending expectations, which is why I shared the Garmin method example, that there is precedent set and there is data to support that you can change some of the policies within the lending institution to make ways for folks that might not meet traditional lending requirements.
And
go ahead.
That was something, Karen, that I loved that, Marcus, you actually put in one of your original or your earlier things, figuring out collective financing to not be as wedded to traditional funders. That was definitely a big part of that convening that Karen was discussing when we were in Little Rock, is again, just reshaping these expectations because a financial entity and a funder is going to be the first that tells you ownership is the key, right, for economic well-being. It's the way you grow your wealth. Yeah.
Any other questions right now? Because we are getting to the end here, and I want to make sure that we leave some time for you guys to participate in the conversation here, because we've got a lot of knowledge on this call. I know what some of you do and some of the work that you're involved in. So I would love for you to put some questions out there or to even contribute if you have something to contribute. Okay, we'll watch the chat, but I'll go ahead and share my last slide. And we'll watch the chat to see if there's any additional questions. So what I have here on the last slide, and like I said earlier, how we measure the equitable food system is of great importance to me. And as the other thing I said earlier is that using mixed methods, using both qualitative and quantitative information, especially since this is a transformative approach and we're looking at issues around racial equity, we want to use both kinds of data. The results-based accountability approach, which is what I have an example of on this slide, is one way to think about establishing metrics to think about equity in the food system. The example I have here is of the policy recommendation that Hannah talked about earlier. And basically, how will we know that we have achieved the redefinition of the food system if we use that approach? And let's see, I've got to make my screen a little bigger here because my eyes can't see what this says. So if we answer some of these questions, if we say, how much did we do? And we're applying that farm credit reform example. If we make $500 million a year in grants to support sustainable agriculture and food system, if we actually make that happen, then in that example, we would have met one of our targets. How well did we do it? One way to understand that would be to look at the change in the density of ratio of convenience stores to stores providing healthy foods in communities of color. So that I got that measure from the Michigan State University Equitable Metrics handbook. The third question you would ask is, how hard did we try? And here the example I have is looking at the funds raised to build capacity for advocacy, leadership development, and lobbying. So that's just one metric, and that's also an example from that Michigan State University Equitable Measures book. And then looking at, is anyone better off? So looking at the number of socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers by the percentage of SDFRs would be one way of looking at that. So again, thinking about different ways to measure equity as we are making incremental change, so that we can better understand what that change looks like, is something that I'm a proponent for, so that we can have the right kinds of conversations and start to make so are we going in the right direction? Are our numbers going the way we want them to go? And if not, what do we need to do to make it happen? So I'll pause there. And Kathleen and Hannah, do you have anything to add? And then if not, back to Kathleen.
There are a couple of questions I want to bring attention to. There's one in the chat about learning more about the Michigan State University Equitable Measures Handbook.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's a link to, I can provide the link to that. Let's see, do I have it here in my notes? I probably could just pop it in the chat. I do. So I will put it in the chat.
And then earlier when you were asking about ways that we would, I guess, know that things were more equitable, Laura had mentioned, so first she mentioned institutional purchasing from BIPOC farms, and then she also has the acronym ephod, EBOD, with a question mark. So I'm not sure if it's like a question of what is ephod, or if we think that, Laura, do you want to ask more about that?
I think it was the slide before, and because I may have gotten the acronym wrong. If you can go to the previous one, ephod.
ephod.
Yeah.
Okay.
So can you just speak to that a little bit more, Karen? I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, and Hannah, I'll ask Hannah to step into a little bit here, but so the ephod, what it stands for is, I have to look at the spelling here.
Equitable food oriented development.
That's right. And it's an approach that some communities are using, that basically gives the power to the members of the community in the design and development of the food system. And Hannah, do you know where it's actually being practiced? Because I
I
can't.
dropped it in the, I dropped to one of the papers that were written, that was written by the group in the chat as well. The organizations that formed the collaborative are scattered across the US, and they've done a really great job of also identifying community projects that they feel like portray our equitable food oriented techniques. So there's actually, they've developed a map as well that would highlight additional organizations across the US that embody that work. And it's, if you go and you look, you'll even see that some of it's not actually food. Like the organizations may not be doing direct food delivery or food, agriculture or processing work, but they are recognizing that by a community organizing and instead producing textiles or something that is, something that is unique to their community, uses their own community sustainable resources, but they are at the same time creating their own ownership, wealth generation, and also, therefore able to afford their own food in different ways and self-sovereignty and things like that. So they really are taking a critical approach and looking at how programs are developed, who develops them, who owns them, to the earlier question, that work as well. So they've laid out some really great criteria. It's a good read.
Some of the things, Laura, that I shared earlier that Leah Penniman is doing at Soulfire Farm would fall under the umbrella of the ephod approach. So like she's bringing the young men that are on parole and probation to work on the farm, to work off some of their restitution. So while she's teaching them, how to take care of themselves, and they're also paying off, whatever their debt to society is. So that's like an approach to giving them some of their power back by giving them a skill that they can use once they've they're at a space where they can get out on their own and start to build their own business. So ephod is not just one way of doing it. It would look different. Like Hannah said, for some it's different kinds of businesses, and it may look different in different communities, but it's the principles that of ephod that are being applied. Does that help? Are there other questions? I just want to say I really appreciate everybody being here tonight, and the questions have been great. I do, Kathleen, if you want to, I'll let you share the sharing information.
Okay, so what we're going to be doing is putting this we've recorded this presentation, and we will also connect the PowerPoint slides with it, and those will be available on the LEAP website. Also, if Kali, could you put the Google form sign up sheet in there again? If anyone wants to get that information sent to them through their email, then please go ahead and sign up on the Google form that Khalid has put in the chat. Otherwise, everything will be available hopefully on Friday. And also, we plan to do 2 more of the In Process series this year or this spring. So hope you will continue to join us, and you can learn about those announcements by signing up to get information from LEAP. Hannah and Karen and I will stay on a few minutes longer in case anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask. But otherwise, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight and offering your insights and ideas. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Okay, I'm going to take screen share off.
Hi, you all. I had a quick question that came up. I'm curious about how accountability, hey Hannah, accountability showed up. Accountability to community partners and how funders and organizations and institutions are being accountable to those communities. And how would you measure that?
So, and what, Ginny?
Ginny.